Welcome. Shalom. Welcome to the L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, as presented by Leslie Simpson. We're so glad you could come. I'm Caroline Ingvelson, the Secretary Treasurer of AJL Canada, and it is my honor to introduce Leslie. Leslie Simpson is the founder of L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project. The project is a newsletter on the Substack platform that features Jewish wisdom letters from around the world. These are letters most often, but not always, from parents to children about how to create a purposeful life. In these letters, Jews share what has made their lives meaningful, how they navigated catastrophe, and what has sustained them with joy. The letters are as varied as the people who wrote them. Leslie Simpson is a former journalist and published children's book author. She did her PhD about this tradition because she developed what she calls a serious case of radical Jewish curiosity. Leslie is searching for more unpublished letters and hopes one day to publish a new collection of this extraordinary tradition. Now, please keep your questions in mind as the program continues and put them in the chat so I can call on you at the end of the program. And now here's Leslie.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm really delighted to see everybody, and I'm actually really tickled to be doing this with you. The purpose of this workshop is to give you a little bit of a 101 about this tradition, but I also have a secret invitation for everyone here, and that is that if you're curious about the tradition, you can think about what you might write if you were writing one of these yourself. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Marjorie, for doing this. Just a tiny bit of background about me. I worked as a journalist for Canadian daily newspapers in most of my grown-up life, and I found myself increasingly drawn to Jewish subjects. Now, this sounds super corny, but it's true. I read a book called So That Your Values Live On. It's a slightly long title. It was a collection of these letters, and I felt like Alice in Wonderland. I felt like I had gone through a porthole, and I was reading these letters from people I would never meet and people I didn't know. And I imagined it was like an incredible dinner party where people were talking about the things that had really mattered in their life. And as someone who has a very small threshold for small talk, I kind of fell in love with this tradition and I wanted to learn more, hence the radical curiosity. We're going to go to the next slide and we're going to jump right in. So the question is, that I'm going to kind of explore today is, first of all, what are these? A little bit of an introduction to the repository so you can hear what people are writing about. And lastly, an invitation for you to subscribe to L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project. There's no fee. You just click on the link. And if anyone here happens to have a letter or ends up writing a letter, I'm particularly interested in collecting more letters from the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews from Algeria, Libya, Iran, Iraq, Yemen. I'm still looking for those, and I'm looking for more. We're going to move to the next slide. Before I start actually sharing the letters with you, some people ask, well, where does this idea come from, this kind of obsession with memory? And it's embedded in the Torah. The letters themselves are more concerned with precept than property. They're people talking about how they've created meaningful lives. Why do they matter? You hear people talking very honestly. No one is speaking on your behalf. Probably most people here are old enough to have had the experience of, let's say, going to a funeral, and the person doing the eulogy gets a small detail wrong, and it feels like a bit of a violation. In these letters, no one is speaking on your behalf. They're highly democratized. And I kind of think of them each like a little snowflake. I think that's one of the reasons that really drew me to them in the first place was this idea of human voice. And I'm hoping at the end of this little conversation that we have, you'll hear the different voices from people that you also have never met, but you'll get a sense of what they're about. We're going to go to the next slide. Thank you, Marjorie. This idea of memory and this obsession with memory actually comes from the Torah, so it has very ancient roots. However, the one thing I want to say is that in English, we think of memory as recollection, and Jewish memory, and particularly the Hebrew verb zachor, is closer to reenactment. So the past in this case is not past. And one kind of concrete example I could give of that this historian Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi gives, I recommend this book for anybody who really wants to get into the rabbit hole of Jewish history and Jewish memory. It's fascinating. If you've ever been to an amazing Passover Seder, I have some friends who invited our family to a Seder one year, and they had a trunk. And in the trunk, they had costumes with gowns and crowns and crazy props. And it was almost like a theatrical reenactment at the table. So that's closer to this idea of Jewish memory. It's not an act of recollection, it's something that is reenacted. And in the Torah, there's all these reminders to remember. Remember Shabbat, remember the Exodus from Egypt, remember Amalek. And the wisdom letters are actually a form of this type of remembering. We're going to go to the next one, Marjorie, thank you. So what I'd like you to do is when you hear them, the thing that to pay attention to is the issue of the voice, because nobody is speaking on your behalf. And we're going to go to the next slide, Marjorie. Thank you. Thank you to Marjorie. So I'm starting off. Some people will ask me if I have a favorite letter, and I've got a real soft spot for Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is the pen name of the famous Yiddish writer Solomon Rabinovich, and he did a phenomenal thing. Before his time, if you look at like the pre-modern repository of letters, so I'm defining pre-modern very loosely as before the French Revolution, those letters were pretty bossy pants, top-down directives, not a ton of a sense of humor. Solomon Rabinovich comes around and he does something completely new. And I argue that he really innovates this tradition. This was part of my PhD rabbit hole. And what he did was he gave his descendants a choice. After he died, they could recite Kaddish, which is the traditional Jewish memorial prayer, or they could gather on his yurt site, which is the anniversary of his death, and they could choose from among the stories that he had left behind, the stories that made them laugh out loud. Now, you know yourself, that's a pretty high bar for a story to make you laugh out loud. And the amazing thing is that for more than 100 years, his family members get together on his yurt site and they choose from among his repository the stories that make them laugh out loud. Now, fortunately for them, the guy was super funny. His humor is very verbal. If you're not familiar with him at all, there's a website devoted to his work that actually has audio recordings on it in English and in Yiddish. Of course, it's better in Yiddish, but it's shalomaleichem.org. So you can hear for yourself if anybody here needs a laugh after I'm finished. I highly recommend it. We're going to go to the next slide, and you'll see that this was the New York Times, the day he died. They reprinted his letter in its entirety. And he said, select one of my stories, one of the really joyous ones, and read it aloud. Let my name be mentioned by them with laughter rather than not at all. And so here we have comedy as a weapon against despair. and also literature kind of replacing liturgy. And in addition, you can't see it because the font is way too tiny, but in this letter, he talked about some other things in the letter. And one of the things he said was, do not waste your money on foolish monuments. The best monument for me is for my work to be read. And we're going to go to the next one. Because I'm in Canada, I'm going to preview a selection of Canadian voices. And this is the order in which they are appearing, like a play. So Rachel Wolf, a mother of 11, I can't imagine her breakfast table, who wrote a letter shortly after Shalom Aleichem died. Albert Quiros, who is a member of Holy Blossom Congregation, who wrote a letter to his son Isaac. A woman who came to a class I taught, who had held on to a letter her grandfather had written to her on her graduation from high school. This woman's now in her 80s. And then what happens when you don't have a letter, which is very common? And that's a man who decided to write an imaginary letter. He imagined what his Romanian-born grandfather might have written to him, and he wrote a letter in the form of a sermon. And then I'm going to close with two extraordinary writers and who happen to be sisters, Henya Reinhartz, who wrote a letter that turned into a tiny memoir called Bits and Pieces, and Chava Rosenfarb, who has letters in a new collection that's coming out that I highly recommend, called Letters from the Afterlife. And we're going to go to the next slide. Thank you, Marjorie. And I'm going to start with Rachel Wolf. We'll go to the next one. And I'm going to ask, I believe we have a volunteer. Thank you, Nancy Cohen, for reading this excerpt from Rachel Wolf.
Okay. So start here with the example.
Yes, thanks.
The example of 11 children of one father and mother standing together in love and faithfulness will be a more beautiful adornment to the memory of your dear parents than the most costly monument.
And Nancy, thanks. I'm going to ask you to read the next one too, which is also from Rachel Wolf.
My darling children, keep together in fraternal union. Let no sacrifice be too great to ensure, the pictures are covering, I just have to move them. To be too great to ensure your mutual helpfulness and the continuance of your brotherly feelings. Every act of love that you show unto one another will do my soul good. The example of 11 children of one father and mother standing together in love and faithfulness will be a more beautiful adornment to the memory of your dear parents than the most costly monument which you could erect and which I do not care for. Though I do not wish to control your desire in that matter. From your loving mother, Rachel Wolf.
Thank you very much. So
I apologize for my dog barking there. I think she saw a squirrel outside.
It's okay. Part of the expected sound effects when we're meeting together online, not to worry. Solomon Rabinovich dies in 1916, and a few years later, Rachel Wolf writes this letter in Montreal. She was not a household name, and she was not a professional writer by any stretch. But one of the things that they have in common is this kind of raised eyebrows about physical monuments. And I chose this letter because it illustrates something fundamental about the Jewish notion of memory. Christian societies are famous for magnificent architectures in space. Think, for example, of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And Jewish civilizations are known for creating an architecture in time. And so these letters are part of that architecture in time. And we're going to go on to the next slide. And I want to thank Rabbi Yael Splansky, who told me about this letter. I've read a lot of letters, and this one that I call Life is a Wheel of Fortune, and Caroline is going to read for us, is an unusual letter that is punctuated with a lot of folk sayings. And I'm just going to give you a tiny backstory to set it up. There's a man named Alberto Quiros who's from Mexico. And when he was very young, his father had a terminal illness, and Alberto was in his 20s, and he spent this time looking after his dad. While he was looking after his father shared with him many of the kind of his life philosophy about how to create a purpose-filled life. Then his father died, and Alberto, who's an engineer, moved to Toronto. And Alberto wrote a letter to his son, Isaac. And that is where this is from. Caroline, I'm going to thank you for reading it in advance. Marjorie, it's our next slide. And if you want to read the entirety of it, you can just subscribe to my L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, and you'll see it there in its full glory. I've just chosen one small excerpt from the letter.
My Abba used to say, life is a wheel of fortune. Sometimes you're on top, and sometimes you're on the bottom. There will be times when you taste victory and find yourself in a position of prosperity. When you do, remember, help others, help everyone you can, especially to set themselves up in a business or to find a job. You will find that when they are on top, many people forget that they came from the bottom. And often, as life goes on, the wheel turns, and those who are on top end up on the bottom. When I was a kid, I remember that our house always had visitors. Cousins, family, friends, and acquaintances who came to see my Abba to ask him to help them find work or give them a reference. When I came to Canada, my Abba had already passed away, but fortunately, I found many people who helped me settle down here, and I am sure it was thanks to my Abba's Zechut Avot when he helped others. Always, no matter where you are, forge good friendships. Remember, a good friend is unconditional, which means that a good friend cares more about you and helps you to be better. There is no life without good company.
Thank you, Caroline. We're going to move to the next slide. So I was teaching a couple of years ago because I teach classes on what these are, just like I'm doing today, and sometimes they include a writing component. This woman came into my class and she pulls a letter out of her purse and she says, when I was in high school, my grandfather gave me this letter. He also gave me some money. The money's long gone, but I held on to the letter. And the letter is from a man named Louis Locketts. And he died 2 years after he wrote this letter in 1962. And so she was the only grandchild to receive something from the grandfather. And I'm thanking Margie in advance, who's going to read. Once again, I'm choosing just a small snippet of a larger letter here. Thank you.
The society we live in gets more complicated, tumultuous, and changes every day. Therefore, to understand those changes, one must continue, especially those that have the opportunity, like you, to study and try to acquire universal knowledge to be able to understand and to orientate between the good and the bad, between reactionary and humanly progressive. And of course, being a Locketts, I take for granted that you will support all striving for the improvement of human conditions in our society.
Thank you, Margie. And I know that this woman is also working on letters for her children and grandchildren right now. So it's a case of the door to door passing the tradition onward. We're going to go to the next slide. Sometimes people will ask me, well, like, what's Jewish about these letters? Because obviously anybody can write a letter. And one of the features, not with every letter, but with some of them, is there's this robust love affair with Jewish text. If anybody's interested in exploring this in more detail, I recommend a mind-blowing book called Judaism is About Love by Rabbi Shai Held. And he illuminates this love of textual conversation across time and across space. Anyone who's familiar with Sefaria, which is probably one of the most powerful Jewish innovations of our time, is putting that Jewish library online for free for everyone, because we are all the inheritors of this library. It belongs to all of us. So some of these letters contain a riff, a play, conversation with text. And I'm going to share just a few. The text is the same, but what is always kind of interesting is why that person has chosen a particular text. And this will become very clear when you hear an example. So I'm going to start with something from Shoftim Tzedek Tirdof. We're going to go to the next slide. It's from a lawyer named Phyllis Finger who lived in Texas. And she says, we have a poster in our house that says, justice, justice shall thou pursue. In 1993, Phyllis Finger was working as a lawyer. Her law practice was struggling. Her husband, Dave, was unemployed. Their house had just burned down.
Okay.
And she did an extraordinary thing in that she wrote a letter. She put it in the desk drawer of her law office in Houston, but she didn't tell her husband and she didn't tell her children about it. And they found the letter after she had died. Her husband, Dave, brought her desk from her legal office to his apartment. And one day he was looking for a document, opened the drawer, and found an envelope with her old letterhead in it. We're going to go to the next slide, and I've chosen just a very small excerpt from her letter. And here you hear she's chosen Tzedek Tirdof. Not surprising because she worked as a lawyer, right? But here's how she understands the phrase. We have a poster in our house that says, justice, justice shall you pursue. I tried to do that with my law practice. Even when we had no money, I tried to take on pro bono work through the Houston Volunteer Lawyers. I believe in supporting volunteer work and in belonging to and supporting organizations that further good causes. Even if you're not an active participant and don't pay dues, your name and number provides support. Join with those who pursue justice and righteousness. Remember, some of your most important accomplishments will not be the ones you're paid to do. We're going to go to the next slide. And I just want to say I'm grateful to Phyllis Finger, who wrote the letter in the first place. I'm grateful to her husband, Dave, pictured here on the left. I met him because I teach for an amazing American NGO called the Shomer Collective. And they deal with end-of-life issues through a Jewish lens. And I was doing something similar to what I'm doing now. And Dave Finger came on the chat and told me that his wife had died and that she had written one of these letters. Sometimes people say, well, how do you get these letters? And in this case, it was thanks to Dave Finger's generosity and thanks to Phyllis's initiative in writing the letter. And lastly, to their adult children, Michael and Jennifer. Earlier this week in my L'Chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, I featured an interview with their kids, Michael and Jennifer, pictured here, because these letters are written for people, but it's not often you get a chance to interview the recipients. And they both Michael and Jennifer had really interesting things to say about how this letter landed from their mom. We're going to go to the next slide. Thank you. This is from an American naval chaplain, and he did a kind of cool thing. He wrote a blog post from the Times of Israel for his daughter. And one of the reasons why I love this letter, it's also in my archive. You're welcome to read it in its entirety. We can go to the next slide. Is he talked about these letters being like a work in progress. And what he did was he wrote his letter to his daughter in the form of a list. And I love this because we all know lists, right? We can all write a grocery list. We can write a to-do list. There's nothing so sophisticated about it. And it makes it easy. It kind of gives you another way to think about how you might write something like this. And for this writer, for this naval chaplain, I'm going to ask Caroline to read the letter. He chose a different Jewish text from the book of Esther. And Margie, it'll be on the next slide.
My Bible lesson. For my life, one of the most important Bible verses comes from the book of Esther, the book that we Jews read during the festival of Purim. When Esther, the secretly Jewish queen, must make a decision for the sake of saving the Jewish people, but one that might put her life in danger, she seeks advice from her cousin Mordecai. He tells her that he has faith that God will save our people no matter what she does. But he asks, what if it is just for this that you were brought to the kingdom? Whenever I face a hard decision, one that might endanger my life or more difficult for many, one that might threaten a promotion or a career, I reflect on those words. What if it were just for this moment, for this decision, that I was given life and brought to this moment in time?
Thank you, Caroline. We're going to go to the next slide. These letters are not so well known in the diaspora, but in Israel, they're really part of the DNA of the country because of the mandatory military service. And parents have been finding these letters in their kids' pockets and their bedrooms. And this is an unusual case where the family of Ben Zussman decided to translate his letter from the Hebrew and read it in English. And what did Ben choose? Ben chose a phrase from Isaiah, Jerusalem, I have placed guards that one day will come, and I will be one of them. And you can see in the Hebrew, Shomlim kol hayom v'kol halayla. So this idea that Jerusalem would require protection in the morning and in the evening. And we're going to go to the next slide. And what you're going to see a video where this letter has been translated from the Hebrew and it's being read by Ben's mother, Ben's father, and Ben's grandmother. Thank you, Margie.
Can I ask you to read this letter from your son?
I'm writing this letter to you as I'm heading to the base.
If you are reading it, something must have happened to me. You know me. No one could be happier than me right now.
It was no coincidence that I was on the verge of fulfilling my dream. I'm happy and grateful for the privilege of defending our beautiful land and the people of Israel.
In case something happens to me, I forbid you from sulking in sorrow. I've had the privilege of fulfilling my dream and destiny, and you can be certain that I am looking down on you with a huge smile.
I probably sit next to Grandpa and catch up on what we've missed. Each of us will share our experiences and what changed between the wars. Maybe we'll also talk a little politics, and I'll ask him what he thinks. If God forbid you are sitting Shiva, transform it into a week of friends, family, and fun.
There should be good food, meat of course, beer, soft drinks, nuts, and of course Mom's cookies. Tell jokes, share stories. You'll get to meet all the rest of my friends that you haven't met yet. You know what? I envy you.
I would want to sit there and see everyone. Another matter that is very, very important.
If God forbid I fall into captivity, dead or alive, I will not allow a single soldier or citizen to be harmed because of some bargaining made for my release. I forbid you to conduct a campaign or struggle or anything of the sort. I am not willing to have terrorists released for me.
in no way, shape, or form.
Don't misconstrue my words, please.
I'll say it again.
I left the house without even being called up to reserve duty.
I am filled with pride and a sense of purpose, and I always said that if I have to die,
I wish it would be in defense of others. In Jerusalem, I have placed guards that one day will come.
and I will be one of them. Shivering. A 22-year-old boy.
Such a cute boy.
And he's definitely a guardian angel over us right now.
May his memory be for a blessing indeed.
Thank you, Caroline. We're going to move to the next slide. I'm grateful to the Zussman family for reading that letter and having it translated from the Hebrew to the English. It's unusual to have a letter being read by the recipients of the letter. The next slide is also someone who is both a recipient and a writer. So Alana Zaman is in an unusual position because she received a letter from her dad. She became a rabbi herself. And we don't often think about, people say, well, why bother to do this? What does it matter? So I think she answers this question, and you're going to hear a short video of an interview with her. For people that are ever looking to read more about this, she's the author of a great book called The Forever Letter. It's her own riff on what a wisdom letter could be. And Margie, we're going to go to the next slide and listen to Rabbi Zaman. Thank you.
Leslie, it's a black screen here, or maybe just.
Yeah,
let's
just
see.
hit the triangle there. We're
Oops,
going to hear some
sorry.
music. Thank you for your patience.
Sorry.
No worries. Here's some little jazz, and then we're going to see the interview.
What moved you to write the book? Were there personal or professional experiences that contributed to that decision?
Indeed, there was. When I was about 14, my father wrote, at that time it was called an ethical will, to his children. And he wrote it as part of an adult education class, and everybody in the class was writing letters to their children. And he came home from synagogue one day, and he handed me this booklet that said ethical wills on the front, and I had no idea what they were. So I look at this booklet, and he goes, one of these is mine, guess which one? And I went to the den, and I started looking through this booklet and putting asterisks next to all of these different letters. And I, came back with like 4 asterisks. Okay, Dad, one of these, it's one of these. And I hadn't read through them because I didn't care about anyone else's letter. I wanted to see what it was that my dad had written. And so he looks at this, he said, it's this one. You did it rather quickly. And I'm like, okay. And then I remember going back into the den and reading that letter. And I read it over and over again. And I just cried. I cried and I cried. And why? Because my dad was this, very well-respected rabbi. And there was this sense around him, at least in those days and ages, it was a sense that here was this being who was close to perfect. At least that's how I was seeing him as a teenager, but that's how the community in my eyes seemed to, they would always come up, your father's this, your father's great, your father's amazing, and I'm just like, wow, okay. And in this letter, he shared some of his weaknesses. And I was like, wow, my dad knows he's human. He knows he's human. And that to me was just amazing. And how he spoke about each and every one of us in this rather shortish letter to communicate who he was. And I probably could tell you sort of who he was without him putting his words on the page. And yet at the same time, I probably wouldn't say it in the same way he did. And it was very profound. And because he hates the phone, I have taken this letter with me and read it and reread it over the years. And when I feel yucky, I pull it out and I read it again. And I hear his voice and I feel his presence.
Thank you, Marjorie. We're going to go to the next one. Now, what is more common, I just want to put this on the table, is that people leave this earth without having written a letter. Many people start but don't finish. Many people don't do this because they think they're never going to die, or they think it's only for professional writers, which it's not. And David Ingber has a really refreshing take on regret as a gift. And I apologize in advance to Rabbi Ingber because we're only going to listen to him for about 1 minute and 20 seconds, but just to hear what he has to say. Margie will go to the next one. You're going to hear a brief interview with him, and I'll just yell stop.
Such a powerful thing to talk about, regret and the importance of regret for a spiritual and I think deeply meaningful human life. The sense that our actions and our reactions matter. What matters is how we are in moments to moments, and to think about the importance and the gravity of each moment and how we live it, and the potential for regret for having lived it the wrong way, makes thinking about our lives a very intense thing, a very beautiful thing, but also something that we might not want to think about. Thinking about regret or thinking about what we might have done differently or what we did right and how we would want that to continue is part of what it is to be a human being, to be a Jewish human being, I think, day to day. In fact, the rabbis say that a person should think about their lives and review it every single day, because really one should think about it the day before they die. And the rabbis said, well, does anybody know the day before they die? And said, no, they don't. So then every day is the day before you die. And so think about your life and think about the things
Thank
you
you,
did right
Margie.
and wrong
We'll stop Rabbi
every
Ingber
single
there.
day. But we don't all do that. And certainly when
And we'll go to the next one. So it's very common for there not to be a letter. And this is what happened to a guy named Harvey Mirovich, who became a rabbi at Beth Tzedec. And he was really wishing he had a letter from his grandfather, but his grandfather hadn't written a letter. So what he decided to do was he wrote an imaginary letter. This is not uncommon. Maya Angelou also wrote a book to an imaginary child, imaginary daughter. And I'm going to ask a volunteer, if we have one from the audience, just to read one slide. Marjorie, the next slide we can go to. So this is an imagined letter. His grandfather was born in Romania. To just set it up, he ended up in an agriculture community in Lipton, Saskatchewan, which is about 60 miles northwest of Regina. And this guy was like a Renaissance man. He was a farmer and a shoemaker. He was a Torah reader. He was a scribe, a sofer. He was a chazan. And he also was like, ran the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, all as a volunteer. So he was kind of the Saskatchewan Jewish version of a Renaissance guy doing everything. And he had 7 children. So this is what Harvey Mirovich imagines his grandfather might have written. And if we have a volunteer to read it, I'll let Caroline choose somebody from among the crew here. Could just raise your hand. Caroline, I see Wanda. And I see Kelly. And
Kelly Barron, yes. Please, Kelly, we'd love to hear you.
I decided long ago that my words of advice are not nearly as powerful as my personal example. My material possessions you will divide among yourselves with ease, but my material things are the least important things that I bequeath to you. The measure of my success as your, do we pronounce this as tata?
Tata.
Tata is not in the money I have raised, but in the kind of family and people you decide to be. I choose throughout my life, throughout my Hayam, to instruct you by the acts and commitments I have made. I now set them before you.
Thank you very much. We're going to skip over this just in the interest of time and go to the next one. because I want to leave room for questions. And sometimes you've probably had an experience where you write a letter and the letter's busting out of the envelope. It gets kind of too big. So this is what happened to Henya Reinhardt, the badass grandmother. Badass is a term affectionately created by one of her grandchildren. She wrote a letter to her 6 grandchildren because she wanted them really to know her as a person, not just from the fact of her position in the family. And she fought Nazis by teaching in an illegal Bundist school in Łódź, Poland. Her life story is extraordinary, and it became a tiny memoir called Bits and Pieces. And Anne Dublin has kindly offered to read an excerpt. And Anne, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to go to the description of what happened in Sassel. This is an unusual story because Henya survived the war with her sister Chava and her mother. But during the war, when they were in Auschwitz, there were 500 women from Łódź who volunteered to work in Sassel. They were building prefabricated housing for bombed out Germans. And sometimes these letters have within them a piece of personal history that has otherwise not been shared. And so Anne is just going to read a tiny section of what Henya witnessed one day.
Thanks, Leslie. We were in Sassel between October 1944 and March 1945. The days were long, the work was hard, and the weather wet, cold, and miserable. At the end of the day, we would line up again to be marched back to the camp where the SS searched us. We were not allowed to bring anything back into the camp, not even a scrap of paper. After the search, we had to line up in an orderly fashion for the watery soup, which was our evening meal. Soon after the meal, lights were put out, signaling the end of another day. One evening during the search, potato peelings were found hidden in the clothes of 2 girls. We were all forced to line up again, handed sticks, and told that we would not receive our soup and would not be allowed back into the barracks unless each of us whipped the 2 girls. There were 500 of us in the camp, and not a single woman moved to lift a hand. We were beaten and threatened. However, nothing moved us to carry out the SS men's orders. They brought pots of steaming soup into the yard and dumped them in the snow before our eyes. We stood outside, frozen and hungry, all through the night. In the morning, we were marched off to work without our bread ration. To this day, I am puzzled by our spontaneous behavior, by this expression of solidarity towards our own, and by the fact that we were not more harshly punished for it.
Thank you, Anne. We're going to go to the next slide. This idea of history that has not been shared is often something that comes out when people start the writing process. And I'm going to close with an extraordinary book by Chava Rosenfarb. Now, Chava Rosenfarb is the sister of Henya, and she's the co-author of a recent book called Letters from the Afterlife. The concept for this book was from Chava's daughter, Goldie Morgentaler, who inherited her mother's letters after she died. And the book is a collection of letters between Chava, who ended up in Canada, and her friend Xenia Larson, who she knew from Poland, but Xenia's life took her to Sweden. She became a famous sculptor, and then she became a writer. Now, in the Jewish wisdom letters are usually written with a presumed public audience. They're written for family or friends. These letters are different because they're letters between 2 extraordinary writers, and they were very close friends. So there's an intimacy in the correspondence that we get to become a part of as readers. And the reason why I included them was because Chava Rosenfarb and Xenia Larson were so extraordinary, and they talked about what had helped to sustain them, all the losses and the trauma they had endured after the war. And I've chosen, Margie, we'll go to the next slide. I've just chosen one tiny letter. So this is a letter that Chava has written to Xenia. And if you're curious about these women, I encourage you to get this book that is just on the verge of being released. So Chava writes, "What a beautiful thing friendship is. All day, I've thought about it. I don't know if you realize that your letters represent a reflection of your entire being. You have a flair for choosing words and images that communicate your personality in a complete and faithful way. And your literary talent is evident in your letters. After reading one of your letters, I feel as one feels after reading an impressive piece of literature. I've kept all your letters, beginning with that little scrap you sent me along with the jewelry box. Do you remember? Well, I went to put your latest letter away in the folder, and almost by accident, I pulled out one of your letters written in 46. I forgot everything that was going on around me. It is a letter written in heart's blood, so tragic and desperate. My first emotion after reading it was an overwhelming feeling of gratitude. If you could only read this old letter today, I think you would be filled with gratitude too." I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to open up the room for questions, and I'm going to ask Caroline to choose, and I'm happy to stay a few extra minutes if anyone has extras. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. L'chaim, the Jewish Letters Project. There's no fee, and I'm still looking for more letters. If anyone here happens to have one or is writing one, please reach out to me.
You're looking for letters, and I'm looking for questions. Anne, could you start us off? Unmute yourself and start off the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, well, sure, but I wrote some questions in the chat. So
Yes.
I guess the first question I have is, where did the term wisdom letters come from? Like, how did it change from the term ethical wills to wisdom letters?
So I made up that term, and I'll tell you why. Because if you say these are ethical wills, all the lawyers in the room reasonably conclude this is a legal document that has legal power, and it does not. The power of the letters resides in the people who write them. And so I made up the term wisdom letters because I think it better encapsulates what they're actually about. They have no legal power. They're not legally binding. If you got one, you could, frame it in your living room or toss it into the blue box.
Thank you. That's really informative. So I don't want to dominate this there, but I did have another question. As a writer and as a thinker, how does your own background and your experience influence the choice of which wisdom letters go in your Substack?
So that's a good question. I would say I'm looking for material that has some kind of meat and substance. So I'm looking for something that's more than, hey kids, I love you, please try to get along. But other than that, I kind of know it when I see it. It's kind of like I've been swimming in these letters for a while, and they're all really different. I think you can actually hear even today from the very brief snippets that we heard from, from Rachel Wolf and from Arnie Resnikoff and from Chava and Henya. The voices are all different. So I'm looking for something that has something that I think is worth sharing.
Leslie, rather than questions, I have some very interesting requests. Phil?
Can I ask? Sorry.
Of course. Yes, please. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Sorry. Thank you, Caroline.
I'll read
Uh,
later.
Thank you, Leslie. Of course, I mean, I have chatted with Leslie many times. It's an awesome work, totally new to me, and probably to the Jewish community to know about these things. So I understand that these letters go all the way back from Europe in the 16th century, 17th century, or earlier. But I also wanted to know, in our days anyway, if a parent leave a letter that's a bit not positive letter to his family, then that will be the wrong effect because the parent is not there to face the kid or the son or the daughter. It's just a reaction, but it's definitely have its place, definitely, about things that you couldn't say. But I also say, you know, at least at a certain age, I think every human being will look back at life and have some regrets, lots of positiveness, but some regrets. And whether these regrets should be put in a letter or faced before end of life, faced with the family end of life.
So I'm glad you raised this issue. I just want to say that one of my favorite pre-modern letters is from a famous translator and book collector and physician from the 12th century whose name was Judah ibn Tibbon. Now, he wrote beautiful material about the power of a library, which is something that is probably close to the hearts of all the people who are here on this Zoom, because I assume we all love books. But I give him the Unintentional Humor Award for the letter he wrote to his son Samuel, because he is having a full meltdown. He is so angry. He is angry that Samuel hasn't perfected his handwriting. He is angry that he's not looking after the library that his father has so lovingly cultivated for him. You can hear the violins going like full blast. Why do I love this letter? Because it shows, like, even in the 12th century, some parents were totally tearing out their hair at the antics of their kids. So this frustration is not like a fully modern phenomenon. But having said that, if you want your letter to be cherished, then you're really angry, then, you know, maybe therapy is a better option than having a meltdown at the child.
No doubt, no doubt.
And
Yeah.
Odette and I have talked a lot because I'm interested in finding more letters from the Mizrahi community, the Jews of Iraq, Iran, Libya, Algeria.
And we should,
I'm still looking for those.
We're digging. I hope if anybody else finds anything to pass the thread to Leslie. Awesome work. We're very proud of you, Leslie.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Can I go on to some requests that we've received? Phil and Wanda would like us to forward the slides from this program. Is this something we're able to do, Leslie?
This is a good question. Is the presentation uploaded onto YouTube? I think that
I believe it will be eventually. Is that correct?
I think that's what
that's our plan, I think.
Our colleague said. So it'll be publicly accessible through that. And Wanda and Phil, if that was you asking, I can certainly let you know when it will be up.
Perfect.
And I think Margie has a hand.
Margie would like you, if you could, to possibly compile a list of all the books you recommended in this talk. Can we email you to get this list?
Sure, with pleasure.
Oh, wonderful.
With pleasure. Yeah. I have a little library I call my bicep builder, so I've got lots of books.
I think I understand that.
Can I just wanted to share this with everyone because Leslie showed you the parents of Ben Zussman who died in this war. And I just thought people would be interested when Leslie first when we first met with her, she showed that conversation, the reading of Ben's letter. And I said, well, I know about Ben Zussman. Friends of ours in Israel, the last time we were there, came to our house for Shabbos lunch. And they brought this made by Ben Zussman's mother. They're very good friends
Oh.
of Ben Zussman. This is on, I think, olive wood. And at the bottom, she has inscribed this in Hebrew. La sipur shelanu yihyeh sof tov. There will be a good end to our story. She's a storyteller and obviously an artist. So I just wanted to show everyone this.
Well,
We
that's
have it up in our living
beautiful.
room.
Thank you, Marjorie.
I have another beautiful thought to share before Anne takes over the reins. Our cantorial soloist at Holy Blossom, Lindsay Rivers, writes, "Thank you, Leslie. This has been so interesting and meaningful." Exactly how I feel as well. Over to Anne.
Okay, thank you. I have so many thank yous to share. Firstly, thank you to Leslie for presenting such beyond interesting but inspiring program. Thanks also to Constanze Kunst and AJL National for facilitating and supporting this program. Thanks to Marjorie Gann, AJL Canada's Programs Chair, whose tireless work made this program happen. Thanks to Caroline, of course. Wait a minute. Here we go. Thanks to Caroline, who welcomed everyone, introduced Leslie, monitored the Q&A, and did some readings. And to all the other readings who brought these wisdom letters to life. And lastly, of course, whether the people who wrote the wisdom letters in the first place. So I've put the link to Leslie's Substack, L'chaim, the Jewish Letters Project, in the chat. And I've also put the link to AJL Canada's website in the chat. I hope you'll go to both these websites, register, join, become members. And finally, I wish everyone here that the coming Hanukkah will be filled with light, love, and good health. Good afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody.
Anne.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
I think now we stop the recording.
And